Chapter 7. As he was eating breakfast the next morning, Basil Hallward was shown into the room. "I am so glad I have found you, Dorian," he said. "I called last night, and they told me that you were at the theatre. Of course I knew that was impossible. I had a terrible evening worrying whether one tragedy would be followed by another. I can't tell you how heartbroken I am about the whole thing. Did you go and see the girl's mother? What did she say about it all?" "My dear Basil, I don't know," said Dorian Gray. He looked very bored. "I was at the theatre." "You went to the theatre?" said Hallward, speaking very slowly. "You went to the theatre where Sybil Vane was lying dead?" "Stop, Basil! I won't hear it," cried Dorian, jumping to his feet. "You must not speak of such things. What is done is done. What is past is past." "You call yesterday the past? Dorian, this is horrible. Something has changed you completely. You look exactly the same as the wonderful boy in my picture, but now there is no heart in you. It is all Harry's influence. I see that." The boy went to the window and looked out at the garden for a few moments. "Harry has taught me many things, Basil," he said at last. "You have only taught me to love my own beauty." "I am truly sorry for that, Dorian." "I don't know what you mean, Basil," he said, turning round. "I don't know what you want. What do you want?" "I want the Dorian Gray I used to paint," said the artist sadly. "Basil," said the boy, going over to him and putting his hand on his shoulder, "you have come too late. Yesterday, when I heard that Sybil Vane had killed herself—" "Killed herself? My God, is there no doubt about that?" cried Hallward. "My dear Basil, of course she killed herself." The older man put his face in his hands. "How terrible," he said in a quiet voice. "No," said Dorian Gray. "There is nothing terrible about it. It is one of the great romantic tragedies of our time. I know you are surprised at me talking to you like this. You have not realized how I have changed. I was a boy when you knew me. I am a man now. I have new passions, new thoughts, new ideas. But, Dorian, I am different. But you must not like me less. Of course I am very fond of Harry, but I know that you are better than he is. You are not stronger. You are too afraid of life. But you are better. And how happy we used to be together. Don't leave me, Basil. And don't argue with me. I am what I am." The painter felt strangely sad. Dorian Gray was extraordinarily important to him. The boy had changed his art. Perhaps his cruel talk about Sybil Vane was just a mood that would pass away. There was so much in him that was good. "Well, Dorian," he said with a sad smile, "I won't speak to you again about this horrible thing. I only hope that your name is kept out of any scandal. Have the police asked to see you?" Dorian shook his head. "They don't even know my name," he answered. "She didn't know your name?" "Only my first name, and I am sure that she did not tell it to anyone. She told her family that I was Prince Charming. It was pretty of her. You must do me a drawing of Sybil, Basil. I would like to have something more of her than the memory of a few kisses." "I will try and do something, Dorian. But you must come and sit for me again. I can't work so well without you." "I can never sit for you again, Basil. It is impossible," he cried. "My dear boy, what is this foolishness?" Hallward cried. "Did you not like what I did for you? Where is it? Why have you covered it? Let me look at it. It is the best thing I have ever done. It is very bad of your servant to hide my work like that. I felt the room looked different as I came in. It was not my servant who covered it, Basil. I did it myself. The light was too strong on the portrait. Too strong? No, the light is perfect in here. Let me see it. And Hallward walked towards the corner of the room. A terrible cry came from Dorian Gray's lips, and he rushed between the painter and the covered portrait. "Basil, you must not look at it. I don't want you to." "Not look at my own work? Are you serious? Why shouldn't I look at it?" cried Hallward, laughing. "If you try and look at it, Basil, I promise I will never speak to you again. I am very serious." Hallward looked at Dorian Gray in surprise. He had never seen him like this before. The boy's face was white and angry. "Dorian, don't speak." "But what is the matter? Of course I won't look at it if you don't want me to," he said coldly, walking over to the window. "But it seems rather absurd that I cannot see my own work when I am going to exhibit it in Paris in the autumn." "To exhibit it? You want to exhibit it?" cried Dorian Gray. A terrible fear was building inside him. Was the world going to see his secret? Were people going to stare at the mystery of his life? That was impossible. "Yes, Georges Petit is going to exhibit all my best pictures in October. Don't worry, it is only for 1 month." Dorian Gray passed his hand across his face. It felt hot and wet. He felt that he was about to face horrible danger. "You told me a month ago that you would never exhibit it," he cried. "Why have you changed your mind?" He stopped suddenly, and a cruel look came into his eyes. He had remembered something Lord Henry had said to him. "Ask Basil why he won't exhibit your picture. He told me once, and it is a very strange story." Yes, perhaps Basil, too, had his secret. He would ask him and try. "Basil," he said, coming over quite close and looking him straight in the face, "we all have secrets. What was your reason for not wanting to exhibit my picture?" "Dorian, if I told you, you might like me less than you do now, and you would certainly laugh at me. If you don't want me ever to look at your picture again, I won't. I have always you to look at. Your friendship is more important to me than exhibiting a painting." "No, Basil. You must tell me," said Dorian Gray. His feeling of fear had passed away. Now he just wanted to find out Basil Hallward's mystery. "Dorian," said the painter, who did not look happy, "have you ever noticed something in the picture? Something strange?" "Basil!" cried the boy, staring at him with wild eyes. "I see you did. Dorian, from the moment I met you, your personality had the most extraordinary influence over me. I worshipped you. I was jealous of everyone you spoke to. I wanted to have you all to myself. I was only happy when I was with you. When you were away from me, you were still there, in my art." "Basil—" "No, don't speak. I must tell you now what I did not tell you then. That I decided to paint a wonderful portrait of you. I put all my feelings for you into that picture. I felt, Dorian, that I had told too much. I had put too much of myself into it. So I decided never to exhibit the portrait. I told Harry, and he laughed. When the picture was finished and I sat alone with it, I felt that I was right. Later I thought that perhaps I was being foolish, and when this Paris offer came... But I see now that the picture cannot be shown." Dorian Gray breathed deeply. The colour came back to his cheeks, and a smile crossed his lips. The danger was over, and he was safe for a while. What a sad story Basil had told. Would he ever be so influenced by the personality of a friend? Lord Henry had the charm of being very dangerous, but that was all. "It is extraordinary to me, Dorian," said Hallward, "that you saw this in the portrait." "I saw something in it," he answered. "Something that seemed to me very strange." "Well, you don't mind me looking at the thing now?" Dorian shook his head. "You must not ask me that, Basil. I cannot let you stand in front of that picture." "You will one day, won't you?" "Never." "Well, perhaps you are right. And now, goodbye, Dorian. You have been the one person in my life who has really influenced my art. But you don't know what it cost me to tell you all that I have told you." "My dear Basil," said Dorian, "what have you told me? Only that you worshipped me too much. That is not even flattery." "It was not meant as flattery. And now that I have told you, something seems to have gone out of me. Perhaps you should never put what you worship into words." "You mustn't talk about worship. It is foolish. You and I are friends, Basil, and we will always be friends." "You have got Harry," said the painter sadly. "Oh, Harry," laughed the young man. "Harry spends his life saying and doing extraordinary things. He lives the sort of life I want to live, but I don't think I would go to Harry if I was in trouble. I would prefer to go to you, Basil." "You will sit for me again?" "Impossible. There is something terrible about a portrait. It has a life of its own. I will come and have tea with you instead." "Well, goodbye then. I am sorry that you won't let me look at the picture again, but I understand what you feel about it." As he left the room, Dorian Gray smiled to himself. Poor Basil. How little he knew of the true reason. And now he understood more the painter's wild and jealous feelings, and he felt sorry. There was something tragic in a friendship so corrupted by passion. He rang the bell to call his servant. He had to hide the portrait immediately. It had been mad of him to leave it in a place where it could be discovered by his friends. Chapter 8. When the servant entered, Dorian Gray asked him to send Mrs. Leaf to him in the library. Mrs. Leaf had been with his family for many years. He asked her for the key to the old schoolroom. "The old schoolroom, Mr. Dorian?" she cried. "But it is full of dust. I must clean it first." "I don't want it cleaned, Mrs. Leaf. I only want the key." "Well, sir, you'll be covered with dust if you go into it. It hasn't been opened for nearly 5 years, not since your grandfather died." He frowned at this reminder of his grandfather. He had bad memories of all his family. "That does not matter," he answered. "I just want to see the place, that is all. Give me the key." "Here is the key, sir," said the old lady. "But you are not going to live up there, are you, sir?" "No, no," he cried. "Thank you, Mrs. Leaf. You can go." An hour later, 2 men arrived to move the portrait. "It's very heavy, sir," said one of the men as they climbed the stairs. "I'm afraid it is rather heavy," said Dorian, as he opened the door of the old schoolroom where he was going to hide the secret of his corrupted soul. He had not entered the room since he was a child. It was a large room, built by his grandfather to keep him at a distance. Every moment of his lonely childhood came back to him as he looked round. It was a room full of terrible memories, but it was safe. He had the key, and no other person could enter it. The face in the portrait could grow old and ugly. What did it matter? No one could see it. He himself would not see it. He did not have to watch the terrible corruption of his soul. He would stay young. That was enough. When the men had gone, Dorian locked the door and put the key in his pocket. He felt safe now. No one would ever look at that horrible thing. Only he would ever see his shame. He went back to the library and found a note from Lord Henry. In it was a report from the newspaper about Sybil Vane. Her death was officially described as an accident. He frowned and tore the paper in two. Then he walked across the room and threw the pieces away. How ugly it all was, and how horribly real ugliness made things. Perhaps the servant had read the report and had begun to suspect something. And yet, what did it matter? What had Dorian Gray to do with Sybil Vane's death? There was nothing to be afraid of. Dorian Gray had not killed her. Chapter 9. Many years passed, yet the wonderful beauty that had so fascinated Basil Hallward stayed with Dorian Gray. Even those who had heard terrible rumours against him could not believe them when they met him. He always had the look of someone who had kept himself pure. Many people suspected that there was something very wrong with Dorian's life, but only he knew about the portrait. Some nights he would secretly enter the locked room. Holding a mirror in his hand, he would stand in front of the picture Basil Hallward had painted. He would look first at the horrible old face in the picture, and then at the handsome young face that laughed back at him from the mirror. He fell more and more in love with his own beauty, and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. Then something happened that changed everything. It was on the 9th of November, the day before his 38th birthday. He was walking home from Lord Henry's, and the night was cold and foggy. At the corner of Grosvenor Square and South Audley Street, a man passed him in the fog. He was walking very fast and had the collar of his coat turned up. He had a bag in his hand. Dorian recognized him. It was Basil Hallward. A strange fear made Dorian walk off quickly in the direction of his own house. But Hallward had seen him. Dorian heard him hurrying after him. In a few moments his hand was on his arm. "Dorian, what an extraordinary piece of luck! I have been waiting for you in your library ever since 9 o'clock. I'm going to Paris on the midnight train, and I wanted to see you before I left. I thought it was you, or at least your coat, as I passed you, but I wasn't sure. Didn't you recognize me?" "In this fog, my dear Basil, I can't even recognize Grosvenor Square. I believe my house is somewhere about here, but I don't feel at all certain about it. I am sorry you are going away, as I have not seen you for such a long time, but I suppose you will be back soon." "No. I am going to be out of England for 6 months. Here we are at your door. Let me come in for a moment. I have something to say to you." "That would be lovely. But won't you miss your train?" said Dorian Gray, as he went up the steps and opened the door with his key. "I have plenty of time," he answered. "The train doesn't go until 12:15, and it is only just 11. All I have with me is this bag, and I can easily get to Victoria Station in 20 minutes. Dorian looked at him and smiled. "Come in, or the fog will get into my house." Hallward followed Dorian into the library. There was a bright wood fire on one side of the room, and 2 lamps on the other. "Would you like a drink?" asked Dorian. "No, thanks, I won't have anything more," said the painter, taking his hat and coat off. "And now, my dear Dorian, I want to speak to you seriously. Don't frown like that. You make it so much more difficult for me." "What is it all about?" cried Dorian, throwing himself down on the sofa. "I hope it is not about myself. I am tired of myself tonight. I would prefer to be somebody different." "It is about yourself," answered Hallward in his deep voice, And I must say it to you." Dorian breathed deeply and lit a cigarette. "Is it really necessary, Basil? I think you should know some of the terrible things that people are saying about you." "I don't want to know anything about them. I love scandals about other people, but scandals about myself don't interest me." "Every gentleman is interested in his good name, Dorian. You don't want people to talk of you as something terrible and corrupt. But I don't believe these rumours at all. At least I can't believe them when I see you. Corruption is a thing that writes itself across a man's face. It cannot be hidden." "My dear Basil, and yet I rarely see you now, and you never come to my house. When I hear all the terrible things people are whispering about you, I don't know what to say. Why have so many of your friends killed themselves? Young men from good families like Adrian Singleton, and that poor young soldier." "Stop, Basil. You are talking about things of which you know nothing," said Dorian. "I know how people talk in England. This is a country where people have two faces. They whisper rumours about people like myself, and then do much worse things when others are not looking." "Dorian," cried Hallward, "that is not the question. I know England is bad, but that's the reason I want you to be a good influence on your friends. Instead, you have lost all belief in goodness and honesty. You have filled those poor young men with a madness for pleasure." Dorian smiled. "How can you smile like that? I only want you to have a clean name. You have a wonderful influence. Let it be for good. Yet I wonder whether I know you. But I can't answer that question. I would need to see your soul." "To see my soul?" cried Dorian Gray. He jumped up from the sofa, turning almost white with fear. "Yes," answered Hallward. There was a deep sadness in his voice. "To see your soul. But only God can do that." A bitter laugh came from the lips of the younger man. "You will see it yourself tonight," he cried, picking up a lamp from the table. "Come, it is your own work. Why shouldn't you look at it? You can tell the world all about it after, if you want. Nobody will believe you. If they do believe you, they will like me better for it. Come, I tell you. You have talked enough about corruption. Now you will see it face to face." There was madness in every word he said. He felt a terrible delight that someone was going to share his secret. The man who had painted the portrait was going to share his shame. The painter would suffer for the rest of his life with the memory of what he had done. "Yes," he continued, coming closer to him, "I will show you my soul. You will see what you think only God can see." Hallward jumped back. "You cannot say things like that, Dorian," he cried. "They are horrible, and they don't mean anything." "You think so?" he laughed again. "I know so, Dorian. You have to tell me—" "Don't touch me. Finish what you have to say." The painter felt extraordinarily sad. He walked over to the fire and stood there. "I am waiting, Basil," said the young man in a hard, clear voice. He turned round. "What I have to say is this," he cried. "You must give me some answer to the horrible things people are saying against you. Tell me that they are not true, Dorian. Can't you see what I am going through? My God! Don't tell me that you are bad and corrupt and shameful." Dorian Gray smiled. "Come upstairs, Basil," he said quietly. "I keep a diary of my life from day to day. I will show it to you if you come up with me." "I will come with you, Dorian, if you wish it. I see I have missed my train. It does not matter, I can go tomorrow. But don't ask me to read anything tonight. All I want is a simple answer to my question." "I will give it to you upstairs. I could not give it to you here. You will not have to read for long."